Okay, I've got my bread after the final rise here, for the final fold, and it's looking quite full. And so the first thing I'm going to do is pour it out of the container onto an unfloured granite countertop. In order to do that, I'm going to get my hands a little bit floury. Make it a little bit on the countertop, nothing much. And I'm just going to tilt my pan here, and I'm going to kind of scrape the bottom as it goes out. I'm just going to let it sort of drop a little bit, kind of slide out on its own. A little more flour. And just ease the whole thing gently out onto the countertop. Just like that. You shouldn't have anything left in the container. And now we have the dough here on the countertop. And step number one is to separate it into two pieces because we're making two loaves here. Something that's a little bit helpful is to sort of sprinkle some right down the center line where you're going to cut, so that as you cut it, the flour falls in a little bit, helps keep things separate. I just estimate the two sides. I got my bench scraper here. And you just kind of go for it. Separate them a little bit as you go. Estimate, try to get them even as you can. And now you have two separate pieces of dough. I'm continuing to flour my hands here. It's okay if you dust them a little bit, because the next thing that we're going to do for the initial shaping, called the pre-shape, is just coat the outsides with a little bit of flour. So I've got some flour, and I'm just going to get a little bit on there because we're about to flip these over. And fold them in half. So we'll see how that works. And I'm just gonna get a little bit of flour underneath there to prevent as much sticking as I can. And I'm just gonna flip this over, and then we're gonna seal them up. So over it goes. And I'll get a little bit more flour on my fingertips. I don't want them to stick at all right now. And I'm just gonna fold it over like that. Same with the other one. Flip it over, keep coating, make sure my hands are floured, and pull it over like that. Now I'm going to use the bench scraper to just get them into a nice sort of a shape, just so that they look nice and round. And I like to do that using the bench scraper, using quick motions where I push and then quick release, push and quick release. I might grab it with my hand and reposition it. I'm only going to do this just a few times until it looks round, because this is the pre-shape. All we're trying to do is go from that sort of chaotic, messy version of the split dough that's been folded over into something that looks more reasonable and has kind of an even surface. We're not trying to shape it. That's why this is called the pre-shape. You're just getting it enough so that it's building a little bit of tension. You can see how high these are. They're probably 3 inches or more tall. And then we're just going to cover them, and we're going to wait for a little while for them to expand out a little bit, and then we'll do the final shaping. So grab a towel and just lay it over. Oh, this towel is quite small. I should use a bigger towel. Hold on. That one has holes. That one has holes. Well, I guess I'm going to use two. This one's big enough.
I want my tool.
Thanks, Daniel.
Come on.
I'm just going to make sure that there's no sort of air happening.
On.
I'm actually going to take one of my holy towels here, and I'm going to add that one on top. We just don't want a skin developing on top of these. Maybe mold the towel in a little bit to try to prevent the air from getting in there. And there we go. That's the pre-shape. Okay, we're back and it's time to do the final shape. As you can see, the two loaves here have spread out quite a bit and are ready for the final shaping. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab a little flour and dust over these guys because we're going to flip them over and we don't want them to stick too much. Not too much flour because we're going to roll these and make them tight, and we don't want too much flour in the way when they get rolled and they need to stick to themselves. If the loaves stick together like this, then we'll just pull them apart a little bit. And a little more flour. And we're just loosen up the edges here a little bit. And we're going to flip it over. Okay, flip one. Flip two. Flour on the hands. Try not to get any flour on it once it's been flipped over. So, enough flour on your hands. It's nice if you got a little extra flour on the table. You just dip your fingers in there when you need them. And we're going to start by getting underneath and stretching out a little bit. The loaf here, we're going to stretch it out. Try to be very gentle and not release any of the air that's been built up in there. Give it a little fold up about 1/3 of the way. And then stretch it out a little bit. And then one side comes in. And then the other side comes over. And then on top here, take the top. And that comes over like so. Now we've got that guy right there. We're going to let him sit for a second, and then we'll do some final shaping. Same thing with this one. Get a little more flour on. Get underneath. Try to pull it up real quick and get underneath where you floured it before. That's why we floured that side, so it wouldn't stick to your fingers. Pull it out a little bit. Fold up 1/3. Pull it out. And then 1/3 toward the center. The other side over. And then the top. Stretch it out a little bit. Fold it over. So we get a nice height on that. You can see it's about the same height as my fist right now. This one's a little less. Grab a little more flour. And now we're going to use the bench scraper to do some final shaping. We don't want to work too much, but we just want to get it back into a nice round shape. So one way that you can do that with the bench scraper is to push and then release. And doing this, you can see how it kind of uses the surface tension of the countertop here to create kind of a squishing, rounding motion. And then you come in from another angle. And in doing that over and over a few times, not too many times, you can start to get and build some tension. And you'll see that there's bubbles that you can see on the tops here. And that's really nice. You want to see those. Those will turn into that really nice blistered outside crust once it's been in the oven. So we just do this a few times. You hopefully won't see any tearing on the top. It'll feel like one continuous cover sheet. And you can see kind of the gluten strands as they stretch out. If you start to get tearing, then you know you've gone too far, or possibly you've overproofed. These are pretty good. And then you can stop right there. This one over here, I'm going to do the same thing. You can see that it's getting some really nice big bubbles. These are actually not very useful. So you can actually just pop them if they're like too big. Big bubbles on the outside of your loaf doesn't do anyone any good. So if they get too big, you can pop them. So we'll do a few more on this guy. And then we'll just let them sit for a second. And while they sit and let them seam up real nice on the bottom, then we're going to prepare our bannetons. So I have 2 of these, one for each. They have the linen liners, which I really like because I don't like a lot of flour on the outside of my loaves. And what I'm going to do is I have a 50-50 mixture of rice flour and wheat flour. And I have this sort of shaker guy. And I'm just going to grab a bit of that. I'm going to turn it over. And you can see this is all perforated with holes. And I'm just going to use that. And I'm just going to kind of tap, tap, tap a few times. Not much. You don't really need much at all. That's probably enough. I just tapped a few times. Just a tap, 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 and done. This helps prevent the dough from sticking to the banneton liner when it's time to put it into the oven. And then the rest just goes back in here. Boom. Don't need that. And these now should be ready to transfer into the bannetons. So I'll show you what that looks like. We'll just grab a little bit of some flour. You can see there's really not a ton of flour around. We're trying not to incorporate too much additional flour during this phase, but handy bench scraper again, and just boom and over, and then into the banneton like so. Next banneton. And I'm going to flip these over when I put them in, because I like to score the tops. So then when they're upside down and they get turned over onto the cook surface, then I will score the tops. If you want the rustic look where you want it to sort of open up and be this organic kind of bloom, then you could put them into the banneton directly this way. And then when you pour them out onto your cook surface, then you would do no scoring. And the seam on the bottom, you can see it's sort of messy on the bottom. That seam will turn into this really nice, beautiful bloom. But I like to score mine. I like the look of that. So I turn them over. And now we have our 2 loaves there. And if we're going for a short proof, then I will just grab my towel, and the towel goes over. I just kind of put them right next to each other. You might want to do a second towel just in case, to really get a nice seal on there. And then we wait.